In Hurricane Neddy, residents of the town of Springfield learn that they are about to be hit by a devastating hurricane.
And the Weather Service has warned us to brace ourselves for the onslaught of Hurricane Barbara.
This sends them into a frenzied panic, leading them to form a mob and descend upon the Quickie Mart to frantically buy emergency supplies. Compared to the rest of the town, the Simpsons' next-door neighbour, Ned Flanders, appears to be the best prepared for the hurricane. He has a sturdy shelter, and he's even kind enough to offer it to the ill-prepared Simpsons.
Maybe you folks should come over and hunker in our bunker.
Homer declines the offer and heads to the basement of his own home. Once the hurricane subsides, the Simpsons' home is completely intact.
Remarkable. There doesn't seem to be any damage at all.
Shockingly, however, Ned's house, despite looking like it would hold out against the hurricane, is completely destroyed.
It's all gone. Everything. Gone diddly on.
And we're left wondering how Ned will deal with the fallout of this terrible disaster. The episode deals with a number of philosophical and religious concepts, including natural and moral evil, suffering, the power of faith, the role of God, and the value of community. Let's start with the distinction that philosophers make between two types of evil: moral evil and natural evil. Moral evil refers to human acts which are considered to be morally wrong. An example of moral evil in this episode would be the looters who descend on the Leftorium, the store that Ned owns.
Down here at Springfield Mall, a storm-addled crowd appears to have turned its rage on the Leftorium.
Natural evil, on the other hand, refers to destructive events in nature that are not directly caused by humans. So the hurricane in this episode would fall into the category of natural evil, because no one has any control over it, not least the people of Springfield.
I don't remember a bowling alley being there.
The moral evil of the angry mob and the natural evil of the hurricane both create intense suffering in Ned. It's not like he deserves any of this either. He's kind, thoughtful, and always maintains the utmost faith in God. But none of this seems to help him when he needs it the most. This is all in stark contrast to the Simpson family. Just before the hurricane subsides, a nervous Marge prays to God for her family to be saved.
If you stop this hurricane and save our family, we will be forever grateful and recommend you to all our friends. So if you could find it in your infinite wisdom
Wait! And it seems as though her prayer is answered.
He fell for it. Way to go, Marge.
It just goes to show you that everything will work out if you have faith.
This leaves us with a question. If God came through for the flawed Simpson family, why didn't he come through for the most religious man in the whole town? Well, perhaps God did come through for Ned, but in a highly unexpected way. While in the rescue centre, Ned asks Reverend Lovejoy a highly important question.
But Reverend, I need to know, is God punishing me?
The Reverend's answer is hardly satisfactory.
Short answer yes with an if, long answer no with a but.
Which leads Ned to seek comfort in the Bible.
Even in my darkest hour, I can turn to the good book for... Dang, son of a gun diddly on!
Only to get a paper cut. His frustration building, Ned then directly addresses God.
Why me, Lord? Where have I gone wrong? I've always been nice to people. I don't drink or dance or swear.
He then says one of my favourite lines in the whole series.
I've done everything the Bible says, even the stuff that contradicts the other stuff.
By the way, there's lots of stuff in the Bible that contradicts the other stuff. The very nature of God appears to be contradictory. In the Old Testament, we see a God that's angry, jealous, and destructive, prompting Richard Dawkins to say the following.
The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
In the New Testament, however, we see a God that is loving, forgiving, and kind. So we can understand Ned's confusion and conflicting feelings. He wants to let his anger out, but his overly strong Christian ethic renders him incapable of doing so.
I want to yell out, but I just can't dang diddly do dang do damn diddly darn do it.
Returning to the Old Testament for a moment, it's worth noting that Ned compares himself to Job.
I kind of feel like Job.
Although the Reverend accuses Ned of being melodramatic, there are some similarities between the two. The story of Job revolves around a man who, just like Ned, is described as a blameless man who feared God and shunned evil. Both Ned and Job could be seen as the most morally righteous men around. However, Job is then faced with a series of hardships and losses. He loses his sheep, oxen, camels, and servants, the sources of his wealth, and this could be compared to Ned losing his house and his stock at the Leftorium. However, the comparison is limited when we consider the fact that Job, unlike Ned, also lost all of his sons and daughters after a mighty wind destroyed the house they were in. Even Ned acknowledges and expresses gratitude that this didn't happen to him.
Well, sir, everyone's alive. Guess that's something to be thankful for.
Job's health was also affected, as he suffered from painful sores. Again, not something Ned had to deal with. So although things could have been worse for Ned, we're still left with what philosophers call the problem of evil. There are two forms of this problem: the logical and the evidential. The logical problem of evil argues that it is logically impossible for God and evil to coexist. After all, if God is omnipotent, or all-powerful, then he has the power to stop evil. If he's omniscient, or all-knowing, he would not only be aware of the existence of evil, but he would also know precisely how to stop it. And if God is omnibenevolent, or all-loving, he would want to stop evil, because he couldn't bear to see those he loves suffer. And yet, the argument goes, look around. Evil, both natural and moral, clearly exists. God, therefore, cannot. The evidential problem of evil, on the other hand, argues that maybe it is possible for God and evil to coexist. One common reason given for this is the idea that evil and suffering allow us to grow as humans, and we learn valuable lessons through the hardships we face. Ned, for example, seems to have the opportunity here to learn not to take the Bible too literally.
I've done everything the Bible says, even the stuff that contradicts the other stuff.
And instead to use his reason to make more sensible decisions.
I'm sure your insurance will cover the house.
Well, no. Neddy doesn't believe in insurance. He considers it a form of gambling.
However, couldn't he have learnt his lesson without losing his entire house? Why couldn't the hurricane have just smashed a few windows instead? That's the kind of thing the evidential problem of evil argues. It accepts that some evil and suffering doesn't necessarily disprove God's existence, but it maintains that because of the sheer extent of evil and suffering, the extreme pain and mass destruction we see around us, it seems highly unlikely that God exists. Fortunately for Ned, there are some counter-arguments, known as Theodicies, which can be used to defend God's existence whilst acknowledging that evil also exists. Maybe it took something as devastating as a hurricane destroying his entire house to show Ned how good a father he is. After all, his kids retain a relentlessly positive attitude, even when all seems lost.
We got new clothes from the donation bin. I'm a surfer. Look, Daddy, Todd is stupid and I'm with him.
And it seems clear that they get this from their usually ever-optimistic father. It's also an opportunity for Ned to appreciate how loving, supportive and positive his wife Maud is.
I know this has been a terrible day, but by golly, first thing tomorrow we're going to open up the Leftorium, and before you know it, we'll be back on our feet.
In addition, it's often only through evil and suffering occurring on such a large scale that a community can rally together to achieve something remarkable. This seems to be the case in this episode, where the residents of Springfield all come together to rebuild Ned's house. So perhaps God allows evil and suffering to occur. Not to test our faith, but to demonstrate the extraordinary capacity of people to showcase the virtues of kindness, compassion, and charity.
It's a miracle!
None of which would be possible without suffering. Instead of relying on God to save us, we're shown that we can be the saviours of both ourselves and of others. However, given that the town's rebuilding of the house turns out to be a complete and utter disaster, ultimately driving Ned to turn on the town and experience a complete mental breakdown, I would argue that the divine purpose of Ned's suffering in this episode, assuming there was a divine purpose to it, was for him to finally learn to let out his anger and other negative emotions. Just as he will have to rebuild his house, Ned will also have to rebuild himself into a more well-rounded, resilient, and psychologically healthy person. So there are plenty of different ways to interpret this episode. The combination of natural and moral evil creates an unprecedented level of suffering in Ned. And although he holds on to his faith in God, he does start to question what he's done to God to deserve this. We see the well-intentioned Springfield community step up to help Ned, only to fail spectacularly. But maybe it was this exact combination of catastrophes, reminiscent of the evidential problem of evil, that was needed to push Ned into growing into an even better person than he was before.
And if you really take me off, I'm gonna run you down with my car.
Maybe.